Welcome to Wimmer's Wilderness. I'm your host, George Wimmer. I have 30 years of volunteer work, community organizing, and 16 years in local government, 12 of those as mayor. Wimmer's Wilderness is an informed look at politics, community, government, environment, and education from a local perspective. Thanks for listening, guys. This is another one of my podcasts on Week in Review, being broadcast on Facebook Live as well. So for my podcast listeners, you'll be able to check out the Facebook Live of this podcast, and we're going to go over a couple differing items this week. These podcasts are 15 minutes long or so, and kind of go over some subjects that I find interesting for the week. And there's really no editing going on here because we're Facebook Living this, and I want this to be as free-flowing as possible. Obviously, the podcast episodes, like the one that we'll be dropping next week on inflation, that one will be a little bit more of a produced product. So today we're going to start out talking about some new things in Wimmer's Wilderness. I'm going to be picking up a couple more package bees. So what that is a container, a wood with wiring and mesh so that, get plenty of air into it. And it'll be a queen along with some sugar water solution and several thousand to 10,000 bees in there to kind of start a hive for you. So I did a 5-part series on honeybee keeping and how to start your own honeybee hive. And so if you want to check that out, that's over on critterfacts.com. Look up, that George Wimmer guy as an author, and you'll see everything that I've written for them to date. And there'll be more articles going up there soon as well. So package bees, you get that. Adding 2 more, so I'll have a total of 5 hives now in our small bee yard, which is right next to our small orchard that I'm starting. I got a couple of apple trees in there, looking to expand that and putting in some plum trees as well. So those are going to be arriving. I'm going to pick those up on Sunday. I'll be posting a bunch of videos and pictures of that experience on Facebook as well as Instagram and Twitter and all that good stuff. So, but I kind of want to talk about that because we're going to be expanding and selling. I did sell some products last winter into this spring, and we're going to be going a little bit more fully into that. We have candles for sale. Going to be making some more of those with some leftover wax from last year, as well as our lip balm and honey, raw honey. So these are all from Wimmer's Wilderness bees, and they're great products. So with that as well. So t-shirts, hats, that kind of stuff on the Wimmer's Wilderness store, which hopefully will be opening mid-July. So that's kind of the update on that. And like I said, the long-awaited inflation episode of Wimmer's Wilderness will be dropping next week. Okay, so one of the stories that kind of caught my eye this week deals with resiliency. And I've talked about resiliency quite a bit. So resiliency is, and you think about it, in a lot of ways with climate change of, making sure that you have proper planning that, what might have been a 100-year flood event, meaning that there's a 1% chance each year you could get a 100-year flood or 100-year rain, and make sure your infrastructure can handle that. Now we're getting a lot of those events quite a bit more often. I talk about when I moved to Isani, 3 of the first 4 years, we had 100-year rain events. So obviously those definitions had to change. But a lot of people think of it more as environmental groups are worried about it, cities are worried about it, those types of things. And it's not just that. Big investment groups, and I've touched on this previously as well, they look at that. They want to make sure any company or area that they're going to invest in has resiliency built in, and they're taking a look at the different kind of climate change issues that could occur. The story that piqued my interest was this one in Nebraska and South Dakota, where 40 ranchers have become part of a pilot program to help with getting them to I don't want to say understand, because ranchers and farmers know their land better than anybody, okay? And they're also some of the people who are at the forefront of managing that land to make sure that it lasts and it stays productive for a very long time. So in this particular situation, there's 40 ranchers, and they're going to be getting assistance on how to improve their grazing practices, water management, helping establish and working with a lot of natural vegetation that existed in those areas and does quite well in those areas, so that the land is managed better, so that it's much more resilient. So when we're getting more big storms, wetter storms, more damaging storms, whether that's tornadoes, whether that's hail, whether it's those massive downpours that we're seeing more and more of, getting the actual land area to better absorb that type of weather pattern. And the reason that I caught my eye, because you see a lot of these stories that talk about this city or this shoreline group restoration project, that type of thing. But these are ranchers and farmers, and I think they don't quite get enough credit at times for the work that they do. Now, there's plenty of issues in areas, whether it's large feedlots that have runoff issues and fertilizer pollution and things along that line. But, most farmers, most ranchers want to make sure that the next generation has something worthwhile to take over. Okay. And they're eating and using the products that they create on their ranches as well. So it's more of just a tip of a hat and letting people understand that, they're the ones that are out there doing a lot of this and are really embracing a lot of new technologies and trying to find good ways to manage their land, not just for a profit, not just to make their products better, but also to make sure that the land is taken care of, because they are some of the best stewards around. The longer thing I'm going to pontificate on here a little bit is, it's one of the, I don't want to say a bad side or a dark side, but it's kind of looking that way when the federal money has been announced a little over a month ago or so from the American Rescue Plan Act that was signed into law by President Biden. And there's a lot of good stuff in there. But one of the things that was a big battle between Republicans and Democrats was making sure that there was money in this plan for local communities, townships, cities, counties. The communities that were hurt. So if you have a community that is reliant heavily on tourists or sales tax collections, okay, they've had their local economies in many areas wiped out, and they definitely needed help. But that's simply not most of the communities in this country, okay? The basic tax that most people pay to fund their local government, whether it's schools, whether it's cities, counties, townships, all that, are property taxes. In the state of Texas, which has some of the worst property taxes in the country, they tout the fact they don't have a sales tax. They tout the fact that they have other, lower taxes. That's true, but their property taxes are often 2, 3, 4 times the property tax rates of other parts of the country, because you got to pay the bill somehow. They don't magically not have cost. Okay. They haven't found some magic elixir to say, we can run a school district or a city with far less money than any other place in the country. That's just not true. Okay. It's just a different tax that they collect. But most places rely on property taxes. City I live in relies on property taxes. School district, all these differing areas rely on it. In our state, the school district relies somewhat on property taxes. The majority of the money comes from the state. And in our district, again, there's not a operating levy on top of the basic collection of property taxes for the school district. So it's not funded as highly as some other districts. But I want to concentrate on the city I'm in, the city I used to be mayor of, not anymore. But they kind of got a windfall, as a lot of cities did. I'm going to use them as the example. So it's under 6,000 people. Total budget is around $4 million. It's been going up quite a bit, so they might be at about 4.6 by now. But they got a $700,000 windfall with really very few restrictions. And some communities are looking at, well, it's not that there's few restrictions, there's very little guidance from the Treasury Department, meaning that, you get this bundle of money and sometimes it'll say it can only be used for construction of something, or it can only be used for a police program or a fire department program, or, whatever it might be, stormwater control, road construction, that type of thing. There's really not much guidance if you look at it that way, meaning that, well, should we not spend it on anything till we know for sure? Or you can look at it the other way, saying that there's no restrictions. I mean, there's virtually no restrictions on this money, okay, other than, put it in somebody's pocket and them walking out of City Hall with it. There's very little restrictions on this money. So the city has got this extra $700,000, okay, and it already gets state aid and, funding from all over the place as well. But now you have this chunk of money. And you think, okay, well, pandemic was hard. It hit a lot of communities hard. It hit a lot of businesses hard, and it did hit those communities that rely on a sales tax, a use tax, tourist tax, those types of things as a big component of the revenue. But property taxes didn't go down during the pandemic. They didn't go down here. They didn't go down pretty much anywhere. I mean, it had really no impact on that. Now, the people who are paying those property taxes could have been hurt, okay, and many of them were. But that property tax bill still comes due. It's not like the city of Isandy or other places are saying, hey, you know what? You don't need to pay your taxes this year. We've got this other money. That's not how that's working. So this money's going in. The city, in our particular situation, actually, they increased their taxes. I think it was about 20% or so. And so they bring in a lot more revenue from taxation. And they're getting a $700,000 windfall. Community just to the north of us, about 50% more population, got $1.4 million, okay, in federal aid, under no guidance or no restrictions, however you want to look at that. And so it's all over. It's every state. There's resources out there where you can fairly easily look up, who's getting what of this funding. And it's one of those things that was done in kind of a catch-all method. Places that needed it, got it. Places that didn't need it, got it as well. And it leads to a concern of how is this money being spent? Okay. And is it, some communities want to lower taxes because they've got this money. Good idea. I'm all for that. Some places are using the money for this project or to complete this or that or whatever. Again, that might be perfectly valid, but in most cases, it's not to fill in a hole caused by the emergency. And that's one of the things that, from a philosophical standpoint, I think, those of us who worry about local communities need to be aware of, because when there is something that definitely does hurt. So when we went through the Great Recession, that devastated local communities because, one, it was, a number of years. It affected property taxes getting paid because, foreclosures were happening. Take a year or two for a foreclosure to actually finally occur. Over that year or two or three, you weren't getting any money from that particular property. That's none of those things like that have really happened here. Okay. So we've got to be a little careful when we embrace a program like that, or at least this component of a program like that, where money is being piped into communities that don't really need it. Okay. And there's that other argument, and I can, kind of hear it already that, well, they just wanted to get as much money out the door to get the economy going. Okay. Then that's how this money should have been targeted. Okay. And there should have been specific things on how it needs to be spent. Because if that's the goal, there's going to be some communities that are going to say, hey, we're going to take this, we're going to put it in our rainy day fund. We may not spend it for 5 years, which again, may be a perfectly valid thing in their particular community. But if that's not the goal of the legislation, so we just need to be careful of how we get these, this manna from heaven type situation, because I think that leads to some bad decision making, and it leads to a little, the sky is falling mentality when there truly is a crisis that local communities need help. People are going to be a little less supportive of putting money out there like this when they're going to see that, it really wasn't needed in a lot of places, and it didn't have any really direct positive impact on the people who are paying the bill. It just increased how much was being spent on the other end. So that's kind of my 2 cents on that. One last quick thing here, as I'm going over my 15 minutes here pretty quickly, is, a lot of conservation news has been floating around, and that's going to, pretty much be a steady stream of that. But, we have that, the 3 R's: reduce, reuse, and recycle. And the reduce side is, don't take as many plastic bags, don't use as many, plastic products, don't use too many of anything, only kind of use what you need to use. I've also done something where I'm trying to make every one of the products that I'm producing in, completely recyclable products. Instead of having something like a plastic, lip balm container for our lip balm, gone to a cardboard material, and it's a push up from the bottom and all that kind of stuff. And, it's got the good stuff in there. But, it's not quite as convenient as something that's a twist turn type deal, but we don't want to put more waste out there, because the flip side, and something the majority of people have kind of thought, or a lot of people have kind of thought over, decades and decades of it being driven into our head, is that, you have plastic, you have these things, we just simply recycle it. Well, the recycling program never has worked the way we wanted it to anywhere. Okay. Pretty much in United States, in Europe, a lot of that stuff that we thought was being recycled was simply being shipped, to countries like China, which took a lot of it. Philippines took a lot of it. Southeast Asian countries took a lot of it, and they'd sort through it by hand and get out what they could. But within this last couple of years, they've stopped doing that. So you're having all this plastic piling up. People are like, well, hey, you look on the bottom of the container, it says a 1 or a 2 or a 7 or a 6 or whatever it might be. There's a lot of confusion about what that actually means. Only the 1 and 2 stuff are things that you can readily recycle, and most, recycling that you do in your home, only those 1 and 2s actually are able to be recycled by most waste management companies. So when you see a 5 or 6 or 7 on there and you put it in the recycling, it's not actually getting recycled. It's basically being turned into garbage and making the actual recycling of those other plastics a lot harder. And then there's little things that most people don't think of, like when you recycle a gallon jug from milk, you're supposed to actually cut that little, what's left over from the cover on top there, because it's a different kind of plastic. So there's a lot of rules around that. And most of that stuff doesn't get recycled. I'm wearing this shirt, okay, Rocky Mountain. It's from a company that's made this shirt out of plastic bottles. Okay, it's 6.5 plastic bottles went into making this shirt. And I did a whole podcast and also wrote an article you can find on critterfacts.com about how that process works. Because basically you're taking the plastic, reusing that material, and then once that material gets broken down, it goes through the exact same process as any other oil-based material, polyester, things like that go into making clothing products. So think a little bit more about that reduce side. Some people are pretty good at the reuse. I think a lot of people try to do the recycling, but a lot of the recycling stuff isn't really recyclable to begin with. Two, the stuff that is even easier to recycle doesn't actually go anywhere to be recycled because there aren't quite enough companies, and it's getting better every day. Don't get me wrong. More businesses like the producer of this shirt, that are taking those products, water bottles, things like that, to make new products out of it. But we really have to use a lot less than that. So that's going to be touched on. I did about a 15-20 minute segment on a podcast last year, and about the same segment size a year before as well, on kind of recycling and that type of thing. And we'll probably do another one this year with a lot more facts and figures and that kind of thing. But really be thinking about trying to do more of the reducing of having less stuff coming in the front door with what you're doing, and places that you're purchasing from. One of the things I look at is, I ordered this XYZ product that, might be this big, and it ends up coming in a package, big enough I can't even fit my hands on the screen, right? So there's just all this kind of nonsensical things going out there. Try to think about that a little bit more as you're looking at what you're going to purchase, because it's that whole thing, how far is it being shipped, where, what type of packaging it's coming in, what is its actual life cycle, and I can't remember where it first came from. And I'm sure there's a lot of claimants to it, but human beings are probably the only creatures God created that would take a product that takes millions of years to create, being, oil, and turning it into things that are just one-use applications, right? One, piece of plastic for something is used once. All right. Plastic is great for lots of uses. Okay. Don't get me wrong. It's convenient. It's helped a lot of modern technology occur. There's, this microphone has a number of pieces in it that are, petroleum based. And we're getting better at finding replacements for that. But when it comes to just simple little things, all right, that are made out of plastic that don't really need to be a priority to be made out of plastic, that are one use kind of things where it's used and then you just toss it, we got to be thinking about that a little bit too. So, not any one of us can fix any single big problem like that, but if we can all just kind of do our little part with that. So, all right. I want to thank you for listening. Let me know if there's any topics that come up to you. The inflation podcast will be dropping next week, Thursday. That'll be coming out, and that'll be a full-length podcast. First one we've done in about 6 weeks, I want to say. And we'll keep doing these week in reviews and seeing how they're going, and see if we still want to keep doing the videos on these, and if we want to add video to the longer form podcast as well. So we'll keep experimenting and see how it goes, and then hey, wish me luck, everybody, that I get my new hive set up well, and that we I see I'm even terrible even thinking of it, but knock on wood that with all the bear activity where I keep my bees, no one's come along and decided to take anything. And yes, I'm fully aware now that I said that out loud, it probably will happen. But so I'll be posting some videos and pictures of that process, and hopefully have a whole bunch more happy bees, and probably a whole heck of a lot more bee stories as the year goes on.
Thank you for joining us today. Help us spread the word by telling your friends, family, and heck, even your frenemies that they can find us on iTunes, Spotify, Luminary, iHeartRadio, Stitcher, Google Podcasts, TuneIn Radio. Pretty much anywhere you can find a podcast, you're going to find Wimmer's Wilderness. To learn more about us, go to wimmerswilderness.org. Make sure to follow us on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram at Wimmer's Wilderness.